Shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, we do not intend it to be long, and we intend it, brothers and sisters, to be taught in two different aspects or two different nights. All right. And to those who are in attendance, Todah, and I would like to say I apologize for starting a little later than anticipated. All right. So it is now 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we don't intend to go past 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Let us begin in this particular case. Giving honor to the Creator of heaven and earth. This presentation, it has been some years since the brother Mighty Hebrew and myself came together to do a presentation. We hope and pray all is well, and we hope you all learned from this. Shalom. For those who watched the presentation that was done Eastern Standard Time on the channel BTV Productions, know where this was coming from in this particular case. And brothers and sisters, I want to give a shout out on a human level to the family in York, South Carolina, to the family in Charlotte, North Carolina, to my immediate family in Tennessee, and of course, to the love and the lady in my life, Sarah Michaela of the house of Judah, a person who has supported me, encouraged me, and was there for me in many, many cases. Let us continue on, brothers and sisters. The statement about Assyria concerning the Israelites and the source. The Assyrian and Babylonian kings mention several of the kings of Israel and Judah in their records. Now, let's stop there real quick, because that goes to show that since the Assyrians and the Babylonians mentioned the Israelites, and the record that Babylon left of King Jehoiachin, and the record that the Assyrians left of King Manasseh does not contradict what the Bible states. Esarhaddon of the Assyrians mentioned Manasseh, king of Judah. Brothers and sisters, Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria mentioned some of the kings of Israel, as did Shalmaneser III. So these are just things we want to point out for edification purposes. All right? Now, that is referred to, brothers and sisters, as the Battle of Karkar, for those who are familiar with it. All right? Now, when you go into that book there that is shown called the Ancient Near East, that book right there is showing the citations of what I'm talking about in this particular case. Let us go on, brothers and sisters. The matter of Egypt in a short history. In ancient Egypt, there were 32 dynasties. Of the 32 dynasties, we see that the 15th, 16th, 22nd, 25th, 27th, 31st, and 32nd were ruled by those who were not natives to Kemet. The 15th and 16th were the Hyksos from Asia. Now, the people who were called Hyksos didn't call themselves that. They were called, brothers and sisters, Haikushosret. But as I pointed out in the book that I wrote, Thank the Most High, Egypt Talking Writing, the Hyksos, brothers and sisters, were a conglomerate of different nations. So for us as Israelites, we know good and well that the term Haikushosret or the Greek term Hyksos, both are bywords given from one people to another. All right? The 22nd were Puttites or Libyans. The 25th were Cushites. The 27th and 31st were Persians. Now, brothers and sisters, the Persian rule over Egypt was in the 27th, and then Egypt came back in the 28th, the 29th, and then as we get along into the 31st, we see the Persians are back at rule in Egypt. They never did come, they being the Egyptians, never did come to their ultimate rule again after the fall of them in the late kingdom or the late period as it is called. All right. The last Greek ruler of Egypt was Ptolemy the 15th. After the rule of the Greeks over Egypt, Egypt became a Roman province. Next slide. The statement of Islam and the source. In the 6th to 12th century AD, we see that Islam was rife in the earth. We see that blacks were made to convert to Islam. Thus today we see Muslims in Africa. Now, this book here, The Jews of Africa, gets into that particular case and so forth. When you go in your own time into the book Hebrewisms of West Africa, that book too also speaks upon that particular aspect. When you go into a book called Black Southerners by John Bowles, that book too gets into the aspect, brothers and sisters, of black people being enslaved by the Arabs, and that in many cases is how many of our people began to follow the religion of Islam itself. All right. What I'm pointing out in this particular slide is the question to ask, how do we get, quote, Jews in Africa when the missionaries were Christians and Muslims? Did the European Jews attempt to convert people in Africa into Judaism? Or do situations such as the Habesha of Ethiopia and the so-called Falashas of Ethiopia outdate the European Jewish existence? All right. That's just something we want to point out in that particular case. Let's go on to the next slide. The statement in the scholar's book. So how can we account for the records left by Mungo Park, Leo Scipio Africanus, J.A. Rogers, and Nahum Schultz, among others, who say that the blacks fled from Israel the land during the Greek and Roman Empire and scattered in Western North Africa? Now, in your own time, you can, brothers and sisters, look up the battle that happened between 115 through 117 AD. All right. In that particular battle, the people of the Israelites who were in, brothers and sisters, Libya, was going against the people of Rome to get back into the land of Israel. All right. So that right there is just something we want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right. The book that you see there, From Babylon to Timbuktu, is a book, brothers and sisters, that gets into the Israelite history as we've been talking about for decades. The author of that book is Rudolph Winslow, and I suggest people get that book, brothers and sisters. It's a very, very good book to get. Has a whole lot of info in it. When you get your own time, you can, as pointed out, look up what is referred to, brothers and sisters, at the Kittos battle. The Kittos battle, brothers and sisters, was fought by the people of the Israelites who were already in Libya. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. The matter of historicity in the ancient nations. The ancient Canaanites made a plea to Akhenaten of Egypt to send help to Jerusalem due to the Habiru who were attacking. Now, one of the things we want to point out is the standard chronology that's given of the ancient Egyptians by many accounts is not accurate according to the world timeline. When brothers and sisters Manetho and others speak about the Egyptians in the timeline, they in many cases just used one king, then the next king, then the next king, without giving acknowledgement that some of them kings ruled at the same time. So the timeline is pushed back up. So this is something, brothers and sisters, we want to sit there and point out for edification purposes. All right? Let us go on, if we will, to the next slide. Explaining that many who bash Hebrews are incorrect. Egypt had provinces in other lands. In the time of Esarhaddon of Assyria, we see that Egypt was conquered in 671 BCE. Then in the time of Cambyses of Persia, we see that Egypt was conquered in 525 BCE. The Persian Empire was from 538 to 531 BCE. Now, in the Battle of Gargamella is when Darius III lost to Alexander of Macedon. Egypt was not in much power of herself after Cambyses conquered her. The Persian rule over Egypt was during the 27th dynasty of Egypt. Then Egypt came back in dynasty 28 and ruled over their people, but that was short-lived. Persia came back and ruled over Egypt yet again. The Persian Empire came to an end when Alexander defeated the army of Darius III, as pointed out. The native Egyptians were happy to see Alexander defeat their rulers, the Persians. Esarhaddon of Assyria was the successor of Shalmaneser V of Assyria. Shalmaneser invaded and defeated Israel in 722 BCE, which was before Assyria invaded Egypt. The point in mentioning this is how can Israel, or the Israelites, be, quote, copycats of Egyptian history and culture when other nations independent of Egypt and Israel, such as the Assyrians, speak of Egypt at one point and Israel at another point. Cambyses, who conquered Egypt, was the son of Cyrus, who defeated Babylon and permitted the Israelites who chose to go back to Jerusalem to do so. History shows that claims of Israel not existing, or if Israel existed, copied from Egypt, to be incorrect. See, many times those who try to bash the Israelites, they generally hop between saying Israelites copied, which thus gave the Israelites existence for them to copy anything, because you gotta be in existence in order to copy something, or they try to say the Israelites never did exist. So as I've been asking, and this is no disrespect intended, if you're saying that Israelites who don't say that we are African are sellouts, and that the said Middle East is in Africa, but was broken off for political reasons in the 20th century AD. Brothers and sisters, why are you saying that we are Africans and that the Middle East is part of Africa, but we are wrong for saying that Israel, which is part of the said Middle East, is ours? If we are African and that continent belongs to us, then that means by default, everywhere in that land, including the said Middle East, which you're saying conscious community is truly part of Africa, then that means that we should be able to claim it. The reason is because when you're claiming Israel, you're also claiming a culture. You're also claiming a people. You're also claiming an identity and a language in the land. See, as long as you just say you're black and all of Africa is yours, you can hopscotch this all the way around. But when you pinpoint a particular culture in the said continent, that changes things. All right? So let us go on, if we will, to the next slide. The matter of the Valongo Wharf. The first nation to ever involve itself in the Atlantic slave trade was the Portuguese. Then the Spaniards, Dutch, English, and French. We have to bear in mind that our people were taken from East and West Africa. Mozambique and Madagascar are in East Africa. Now, this coincides and gets into what we were talking about, because we want to get into while our people's attention is there regarding what is referred to as Black History Month. It used to be called at one time Black History Week. As time went on, it was changed to say Black History Month. So we know it is generally given to us because it's the shortest month of the year. In certain cases, the coldest month of the year. But we want to, at the same token, respectfully take advantage of the fact that our people are listening and present what we're talking about so they can take it out and check it out, for themselves. All right, and due respect. What you're seeing here and what is referred to as, sorry about that. All right. As the Valongo Wharf, brothers and sisters, is in today the place called Brazil. Now, it's pointed out in my book, From Assyria to America, right, which you can get online. Brothers and sisters, out of 100 ships, 30 was taken to Brazil. You had, brothers and sisters, what is referred to as the Aberdeen Act in 1845. The Aberdeen Act is the British dealing with the Portuguese regarding the slave trade and what was going on with Brazil. Many of the people that were brought to Brazil were shipped there from, brothers and sisters, Angola. So now when people attempt to state, well, is there any evidence of there being a slave trade? You can sit there and tell them about the Aberdeen Act in 1845. These are things we want to point out for reference purposes. Next slide. The Europeans and the indigenous of the Western Hemisphere. All right, so we want to use here quickly the laser pointer. While the Europeans were attempting to enslave or eliminate the tribes of this land, such as the Shoshone of Idaho, the Micmac of Maine, the Dene, so-called Navajo of Utah and Colorado, the Apache of Texas, the Shasta of California, the Kootenai and Crow of Montana, the Kiowa of Kansas, the Washoe of Louisiana, the Chickasaw of Tennessee, the Seminole and Calusa of Florida, the Saponi and Pamlico of North Carolina, the Iroquois and Seneca of New York, the Shawnee of Ohio, the Wichita and Tawahash of Oklahoma. Among many other tribes of this land, the blacks were taken to the European countries of Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and Italy to be made into slaves. Now, we know good and well, brothers and sisters, that slavery is not our history, but a part of it. One of the reasons why personally I focus on that in the books that I write and create a will and intent to write more books on the subject is because it seems recently they tried to minimalize, as a minimalist, to try to sit there and downplay what happened with the slave trade and what the situation was. We don't want that history to be forgotten. We don't want that to be, brothers and sisters, the focus each time either. But this is not to be on some color matter, but you know how the white blood cells in your body deal with a matter when it's time for it to do so, we have to be as the white blood cells in that particular case in regards when someone tries to sit there and say there's no evidence of the Atlantic slave trade and that we are here or were here already. Now, of course, there were black people found in what you call Haiti of today in the year 1501, even though the first slave ship is recorded to go on west in 1518, which means that there were said black people already here before the Atlantic slave trade. But when you make that statement and then try to use it as a catalyst to minimize what happened with the, you can look this up on your own, Zong matter in Jamaica when they sat there and dumped the people over in the ships into the water. You understand? So we don't want that to be forgotten. Next slide. The historian Eldad the Danite of the 9th century AD stated that the Israelite tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher migrated to North Africa and were later accompanied by Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and Simeon. Hebrew inscriptions were found that bore Hebrew names, such as Yoel, Yoash, Yoab, etc., on walls from Egypt to Mauritania. Mauritania is the birthplace of the Mandingo tribe. The Moors also came from Mauritania. The Moors migrated to Morocco, and by crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, they entered Spain in 711 AD. They were led by a man named Tariq, a Muslim by religion, but some historians say he was from the tribe of Simeon, which, as we know, is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So, brothers and sisters, what we want to point out in this particular case is that with the time allotted, how the history intertwines one with another. You can look these things up as we was going over that for edification purposes. Hebrew inscriptions were found that bore Hebrew names such as Yoel, Yoash, and Yoab. Now, when you go and read about the bombing that was done in Algeria during World War II, they found Hebrew inscriptions on the wall. There is a reason perhaps as to why they try to suppress this truth. That's why there's two things to cite from the Bible. In Psalm the 85th chapter, it said the truth shall come from the earth. In Isaiah chapter 26, Isaiah the 26th chapter, it said that the earth will no longer hide the blood that was shed upon it. So we do not, brothers and sisters, want to sit there and act like we are not going to speak upon what happened with us as a people. Granted, everyone may not love history, but there are those who do. And we want to tell our story, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. We may not have, brothers and sisters, the records of 20, 25 generations ago. And this is how history and prophecy coincide. You understand? Because in history, as pointed out, you can look up the Aberdeen Act as pointed inside of the comment here. You can sit there and look up the record of what happened with Thomas Jefferson in 1807 when they made the international slave trade illegal. So these are things we want to point out for reference purposes. Next slide. The matter of over 5,000 miles. The first slave ship left from Spain. In 1440, the Portuguese set off the slave trade, which lasted until 1888. There were 448 years of transporting human cargoes from one place to another. The average number given as 12 to 15 million brought to the Western Hemisphere is incorrect. There are over 7.5 million people in New York City alone. The slave trade was as north as Vermont to as south as Chile. Brothers and sisters, we see Vermont and Chile, one being in the United States of today and the other being in South America. And how that is over 5,000 miles. So yes, there were people brought, brothers and sisters, to the eastern part of South America, into Brazil, into Latin America. And as we know, before the Spanish-American War or the Spanish-Mexican War in the 1840s, a good part of which the United States was ran by Spain. From 1565, in a place in Florida called St. Augustine, Black people were being treated as slaves there for 300 years, just in Florida alone. From 1565 in a place in Florida called St. Augustine all the way until the Civil War in 1865. And if we remember, they had what they called the Fugitive Slave Act. That was done in 1850. Why do I point that out? Because when talking about this, the minimalist people try to sit there and say, oh, a lot of the people were indentured servants. Regardless of whether their legal status, not righteous status, but legal status, is indentured servant or slave, the fact that they rebelled speaks volumes. Next slide. The Portuguese in their records. Knowing the fact that in 1891, the Portuguese destroyed their slave records to hide their guilt, we cannot accept their records as always authentic. We have to bear in mind that the victims of the greatest crime ever committed, our ancestors were not allowed to read. Who knows how many records were destroyed without our people's knowledge, for we could not read their language. The book that you see there, History of Slavery by Suzanne Everett, is where I get the information about the Portuguese destroying their slave records in 1891. I'm going to conclude on this note and ask this. Isn't it peculiar that the Israelite enslavement in Egypt is denied by some, and by some, the Atlantic slave trade is denied? Is there a connection between the people that were enslaved according to the Bible in ancient Egypt and the people who were enslaved in Virginia before 1619, by the way? Just a question. The matter of 1526 until 1853. And after this, we're going to close out. In 1526, blacks were brought to South Carolina to be made into slaves by the Spanish. I remember traveling with extended brothers from South Carolina, and there was a place called the Cotton Place or something of that kind of sort, right? And it said that it was in Chester, South Carolina, and was founded in the year here, 1791. 1791, there's a sign in Chester, South Carolina. The store had the word cotton in it, said that it was founded in 1791. Brothers and sisters, the slave trade was still going on then legally. South Carolina became a state in 1780s. And before that, it was a colony. So these are things we just want to point out. In 1619, there were 20 blacks brought to Jamestown, Virginia. By the mid-18th century, blacks were pouring into the West Indies and America at a rate of 100,000 a year, By 1768, the English were carrying blacks at 53,000 yearly, the French at 23,000 a year, the Dutch at 11,000 a year, the captains of New England at 6,300 yearly, the Danes at 1,250 yearly, and the famous Portuguese at 8,700 a year from Angola alone. By the middle of the 18th century, there were steamboats used by Europeans carrying 1,000 blacks into captivity. Let's continue. The slave trade was on a rise during the 1780s, at which time 35,000 blacks were taken by British captors. Who knows how many were taken by other European nations during this time? The import of blacks was made illegal in 1807, but this did not stop European nations from taking the children of Israel, said to be Africans, into captivity. In 1853, the slave trade was reinstated in North America when reports of uprisings and runaways flourished. Brothers and sisters, these are things we want to point out for reference purpose. So let's do a mini bibliography and what we're talking about, all right? And then we're going to close out on this particular note and continue on Thursday. In 1526, all right, you can get that out of a book called Black Cargoes by Daniel P. Mannix, all right? 1619, 20 blacks brought to Virginia. You can get that from, brothers and sisters, a book by John Bowles called Black Southerners. By 1768, the English were carrying blacks at 53,000 yearly. So all of this going all the way into here, as you see highlighted, being done, that came from a book, as cited before, called Black Cargoes by Daniel P. Mannix. The slave trade was on a rise during the 1780s, in which 35,000 blacks were taken by British captors. Did you know, in closing out, that the British would capture our ancestors and then sell them to other Europeans? John Hawkins was one, which dates back to the 16th century AD. He traded black people working for the British in Venezuela, which was ran by the Spanish. So when they try to sit there and say, oh no, it was the colonists, or it was the British, or it was the Spaniards, it was you all, and cohesive as a unit. So let that history not be squashed. All right? In 1853, the slave trade was reinstated in North America. That comes from a source book called From Slavery to Freedom by Franklin Moss, M-O-S-S. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. We're not going to go long into these kind of presentations. Give it anywhere between a half hour to an hour, and no disrespect intended, because of people's attention spans. Because I know on YouTube, if I see a video that's 3 hours, I'm not watching it. So wisdom telling me from my advisors to not make the video so long, but break it up, all right, for the attention span of the people. Respect your audience, and in due respect to the Most High, the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. We are going to close out this particular presentation. And brothers and sisters, Shalom, I can be reached at the number here, all right, for edification purposes. 908-587-4841. All right, subscribe to the channel if you care to do so. And brothers and sisters, Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this channel, we're going to have a part 2 to this. Shalom.